Hello to all of our listeners, and welcome back to the Parents Solution, your one stop shop for all things educational. Today I have a guest with me. Her name is Sabrina Osso. Sabrina is the founder and CEO of a company called Osso Safe. Sabrina works as a consultant for promoting safety and preventing violence in the workplaces, schools, and places of residence that we all have. Osso Safe is a company that strives to ensure that people feel safe where they live, work, and play, and they do this through various forms of education and technology.
Hi, Sabrina. It's nice to have you here. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you so much, Kimberly. I'm so grateful that we're interviewing together. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Of course, happy to have you on here. Do you want to maybe tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure, sure. My name is Sabrina Osso from Osso Safe. Feel safe where you live, work, and play. I am a speaker and consultant on promoting safety and preventing violence in the workplace, schools, but in particular in your place of residence.
Very nice, very nice. I like how you said particularly the place of residence, and I think with everything that's happened over the past 2 years, or 2.5 years, there's been a lot of change in people's workplaces. A lot of people are working from home now. There's a lot of different sort of factors that go into that because you're not necessarily showing up to an actual physical location anymore for work. And so, can you tell me a little bit about Also Safe?
Sure. We combine education and technology to promote safety and prevent violence. And our three markets that we focus on are schools slash universities,
Hmm.
workplaces, and places of residence. But we focus on places of residence because the way we see it, everything happens in the home. Everything that happens in public actually happens in the home first. So if we take the time and the energy and the work to make our home safe, then everything else falls into place. Because if you're not safe at home, quite frankly, where are you safe? So, and ever since COVID, our homes have become our workplaces, our schools, and home has always been home, obviously. And you shouldn't have to leave your place of residence in order to escape, right? So a lot of people with COVID or pre-COVID, they would stay at work later than normal. They would stay at
Mm.
school or university later than normal to avoid going home. And I get it. Sometimes you're not getting along with your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. Maybe you're having a tough time with your kids, but it shouldn't be an escape, like an everyday occurrence. Once in a while, that's normal. But if it's always like a part of your life, something is wrong. Home should be safe.
Hmm.
So we at Also Safe, we're saying, look, we need to really change the face of residency to make safety a required standard condition of residency through education, through technology. And we could talk about that more a little bit later in the interview. But homes must be safe. Nobody should live with violence, abuse, chaos, dysfunction. It's barbaric,
Hmm.
essentially. So you should feel like home should be your sanctuary, not a war zone. And that this is what we do at Also Safe, making home safe, um, and making it in documents, in contracts, and involving the real estate industry.
You mentioned that it's through education, and technology, and I mean, the education part is a little bit more obvious, perhaps, because you're wanting to educate people and make people aware, and that's a huge part of business growth and being able to widen your network, right? So the education part is a little bit more clear to me. Can you explain what you mean by technology, by making OSO Safe part of technology?
Sure. Uh, I hired a software company to design an app. Um, and this app it's called the Also Safe app.
Hmm.
And it is on Google Play as well as on the Apple Store. But right now it's being updated. but essentially it detects violent-like movements and captures them in real time, issuing alerts to, let's say, a landlord, to a property owner. And we are marketing this right now to landlords and tenants and property managers. We want this to propagate over all residency, whether you rent, whether you own, whether you have a mortgage or not. But right now, the path of least resistance, if you will, is the landlord tenant portion of the industry. So we're saying, look, Mr. and Miss Landlord, hire us. We're going to get your property Osso Safe certified. What does that mean? They purchase the Osso Safe Home Sweet Home package, and it consists of 4 components. The first component is a policy. Everybody signs the policy. It basically states, if I act abusively, I get immediately evicted from the premises. And we go into full knowledge that that would be the consequences. So the rest of the family can stay, provided that they could still pay the rent or the mortgage. The second component is the seminar, the Osso Safe Home Sweet Home seminar. Everybody gets educated on facts, statistics, warning signs, definitions of abuse, the difference between abuse and discipline, what constitutes a good relationship. So that way there's no, oh, I didn't know that if I pull my partner's hair, that constitutes abuse. Now you know. The third
Right.
component is the app. So this app, as I mentioned, it'll detect violent-like movements. So let's say a landlord has 10 units, and let's say the app will only pick up violence. So it will pick up pulling hair, punching, hitting, slapping, kicking, cigarette burns, sexual assault. It will not pick up conversations. It will, and when I say conversations, it won't pick up non-violent conversations. So if you're just talking to somebody, it's not going to pick that up. It won't pick up documents. So it'll issue an alert to the landlord to say, oh, wow, I just saw you beat the crap out of her in my unit 2, and you just beat the crap out of him in my unit 10. This is grounds for eviction. You knew that this would be the consequences, and you are jeopardizing and sabotaging the rest of my residency for all my other tenants. We have a very strict policy here in an Osso Safe certified property. You got to go. So it eliminates the he said, she said factor, the app, the technology portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth and final component of the package are therapists assigned to the property. So we require in an Osso Safe certified property to check in with your therapist once a month. Is everything okay? Do you feel like anything is looming? Well, Mr. and Miss Therapist, just to give you an example, my kid came home with bad grades. We're not going to beat them up. We're not going to verbally disparage him or her, but we don't know how to handle this because grades are very important in our household. Please help us through this. So it's all, Kimberly, on the preventative side versus waiting for an episode of violence to occur. So it's combining education and technology. Yeah, so I hope I explained, I gave a good summary of the app, of the technology, the education portion of it. This is all within real estate.
Very cool. I really like the idea of the preventative. I'm a huge advocate for taking care of things before they happen rather than waiting until something happens, regardless of what it is, right? It's always better to be preventative than it is to be reactive. Once a situation has happened, in this case, some sort of abusive situation, it's much more difficult, I think, to deal with the fallout of that. Rather than just educating people in the first place, and putting those sorts of healthy measures in place in the first place. I know that you talked about children, and that's actually a thing that's very close to my heart as an educator. So I know that I've kind of done a little bit of research, and I know we've chatted before, and you've said that we have to practice not being abusive, especially when it comes to children. Now, I know that you mentioned that there's a difference between abuse and discipline. Obviously, that is the case. But can you expound a little bit upon what you mean by that we have to practice not being abusive when it comes to children?
Sure, sure. Abuse instills fear, and discipline instills education. So, and I find this with abusive parents. They'll say, "No, I'm disciplining my kid. It's none of your business. You have no business telling me how to raise my child." But abuse is about domination, it's about control, it's about possession, versus discipline is about education, it's about patience and understanding and empowerment. So there's a big difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that it is a practice because there are 15 million children in the United States alone that witness violence in their own homes each and every year. And there are 5 children a day in this country alone that are murdered at the hands of an abusive parent under the watch of a so-called child protective service agency, the courts, the judges, the laws. So what I'm saying is, you might think, yeah, you want a baby, you go through the procedure of having a baby, you have it at the hospital, and I'm talking about both parents, right? It takes 2 to have a child. So
Absolutely.
mothers and fathers, mothers and fathers. So uh we cannot take it for granted anymore that, okay, you're released, you gave birth, congratulations, good job, take the baby home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got to make sure that that home is safe, that the parents are going to practice safety,
Mm-hmm.
meaning positivity, empowerment, encouragement, freedom of choice, respect, safety. Because if there are 15 million children that witness violence in their own homes each and every year, and those are just the ones that are documented, well, a lot of parents are doing it wrong. So they're practicing uh, violence, abuse, chaos, dysfunction. And let's face it, we don't need more of that. We need to diminish and prevent it versus adding to it, versus magnifying it. So, just to give an example, your kid comes home with bad grades, your child maybe is gets into a fight with someone, or they saw something on TV and they say something that isn't right. You're not going to beat them. You're not going to beat the crap out of them. You're not going to verbally disparage them. Yes, they need to be corrected. They need to be disciplined, but you don't hit them. You don't say to them, you're, 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 um, you're a brat, you're a monster, you're a prissy little bitch, you're ungrateful, you're a baby, you're a drama queen.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I hear and what I witness parents doing to their children. And that creates shame. That creates guilt. That creates such negativity in the child that then they start to withdraw. Then they start to think, I'm no good. I can't do anything right. I'm not going to get good grades, or what's the point of studying? Or, and don't get me wrong, there's different ways of learning. So, but they won't even attempt to maybe try a sport or try this exercise for math or for reading, or to read a book, or to, it affects everything. So this is indeed a practice. And when I say that, it allows for mistakes. No parent is perfect. No one is perfect. You're going to make mistakes, but those mistakes should never, ever, ever cross the line of abuse, of violence, of chaos, of dysfunction. There's no excuse for verbal, physical, sexual abuse whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so I hope I explained myself, and I hope I gave some good examples about what I mean by practicing and boundaries, and give each other space. And you as a parent, you are on the watch. I hate to sound like that, but you're on the watch with your kids 24/7. They will copy you with everything, good, bad, ugly, and different. They're going to copy you. So teach well, um, live well. You're going to make mistakes. It's not about being perfect, but don't ever, especially if you come from abuse, it's easy to fall into that trap
Mhm.
where, well, I was abused. This is how I was raised. If you are a survivor of violence, of abuse, your number one job is to not continue that abuse, to
Mhm.
continue the cycle. Your number one job is to break the cycle. So that's what I mean by practice.
Mhm.
I hope I explained.
Yeah, and 100%. I think it's really important. Like you're on the money in terms of talking about how children really pick up on the things that their parents do. And you know, as much as their friends are a socialization sort of um influence on them, as especially as they get older and friends kind of become a little bit more important in their minds anyways, than parents do. The fact remains that parents have a lot of influence over their children and over their children's psyche and mindset and their upbringing. And this is the parent solution. I am we are talking about issues that affect parents and issues that affect children and how to actually mitigate those issues and solve those issues. So I think it's really admirable what you're doing about with spreading awareness with this sort of idea that your mentality is going to affect your child's mentality, right? Your like you like you said with a cycle of abuse, it can be difficult to break, but it's only like you can't use the excuse of, oh well, you know, my parents did this to me and I was physically abused or God forbid sexually abused or whatever. And so that's all that I know. You as a parent and as an adult, you don't have that excuse of, well, that's all I know. What happened to learning more? What happened to there must be
Right.
another way, right? What happened to I can do this differently? If anything, I would think that growing up in a harsh environment, whatever that sort of harsh environment might be, would motivate any parent to want to give their child something better and to want to do better by
Right.
their child than they were perhaps done by or treated like.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. Yes, absolutely. Um, I mean, what kind of a person would continue the cycle, and if it didn't work for you as a victim, as a survivor, right? You came out of it. Somehow you came out of it, or you moved out, or whatever the case may be. Uh, if it didn't work for you, why would you repeat that to your children? It's
Mhm.
illogical. And the
Mhm.
only conclusion really, or one of the conclusions is, uh, you're not well. If you were taught to take a baseball bat, a baseball bat, your shoe, your parents' shoe or baseball bat was used on you to beat you, to show you the right way, or whatever they said. Like you said, um, you learn more, learn better. It didn't work for you. It hurt you. You were crying, you were devastated, you were traumatized. It affected every aspect of your life. So if you're going to have children, you want to do the opposite.
Mhm.
You want to do the exact opposite. If that was black, you want to do white. If
Mhm.
that was white, you want to do black completely. Um, so so yes, I'm so glad that we echo each other, because that makes for better parenting, a better world, better humanity.
Mhm. And isn't that really the the problem that we kind of face today, I think, is that we don't have enough people, I don't think, that realize what the sorts of traumas and triggers and the things that they're maybe dealing with in their past, how that passes on down to their children unintentionally, right? And like you said, no parent is perfect. I certainly am not perfect. And I don't ever pretend to be. If there's one thing that I am, it's authentic. I'm never going to lie about something. I want to always be authentic and honest. It doesn't mean not making mistakes, but how much better is it if you can model a situation where you have made a mistake as a parent and say, okay, I made a mistake. How powerful it is to a child to hear their parents say, I made a mistake. How can I make it better? Rather than, oh, well, they're not saying anything, or well, it's your fault, or I reacted this way because, or whatever, right? And placing that blame on the child, and placing that guilt on, and that shame, as you mentioned earlier, on the child. I think it's really important to model healthy ways of dealing with mistakes, because another pattern that I see in a lot of kids, and this carries over into the educational spectrum as well, is that they are terrified. They're terrified of making mistakes. They're terrified of making mistakes. And don't get me wrong, that's not just like up to the parents. Of course, it's a societal thing too. But as a parent, if you can model to your child like a healthy way of dealing with mistakes, of realizing, oh, I made a mistake, I need to fix it, right? Of taking that personal accountability and that personal responsibility to fix that mistake. What can I do to make it better for you, or for the person that is hurt, or what have you? I think we would be in a much different situation just in general in the world, because we would have people who take personal responsibility and who are used to saying, oh, okay, I made a mistake, no big deal, I know how to deal with this, rather than hiding from it or not wanting to take accountability for it. And then that causes a whole other scenario that's not anywhere close to helpful.
Right, exactly. And your child will really copy you and emulate you, and they'll do it for themselves with their friends, with their relationships.
Mhm.
Um, it means a lot when you say, I was wrong, I'll fix it, I'm sorry. That speaks volumes to children,
Mhm.
because they're always told, don't do this, don't do that. I told you not to do this. Why aren't you listening? Da, 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 on and on and on.
Mhm.
So if you can say to them, I was wrong, I'm sorry that I did this, I'm going to fix it, and even include your child in the fixing, to say, what will make it better,
Mhm.
what can I do, what can we do for each other to make it better, to fix this. And
Mhm.
I think parent, or I think as a society, and certainly parents, well, and I hate to say this, abusive parents, or just parents in general, we don't give credit to children. We don't trust them enough. I think children know more than we give them credit for. I mean, for
Absolutely, they
crying
do.
out loud, we have them in school doing lockdown drills, teaching them how to hide beneath desks to avoid school shooters. And we have children in this country that are smart enough, in probably one of the most panic situations that they will ever experience, some children knowing that my friend just got shot dead, but if I put their blood on me and pretend that I'm dead, the shooter won't shoot me. This is what it's come to, for crying out loud.
Mhm.
These kids are so smart. They are so they know what's going on, and I think also with social media, they're very quick to think ahead, and yes, social media, there's good and bad in everything. Like, with social media, you have to be careful. There's a lot of predators out there, sex traffickers. That could be another podcast in and of itself.
Of course
But
it
I
could.
feel, yeah, but I feel like children, we need to give them a lot of credit, and they are dealing with things that, I mean, forget about fire drills. When I was growing up, it was fire drills, for crying out loud. That
Yep.
would be a breath of fresh air
Mm-hmm.
today, but we don't have that, and it's just it's crazy, and we need to do better for our children, and we need to show them that show children that they have choice, include them in the conversation, include them in the solution, which is what you're saying and what you do. Actually, you're including children, you're making children part of the solution, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how it should be.
100%.
You know.
Yeah. And I think that there's a very powerful, like as an alternative educator, I am all about engagement, and particularly in the educational field. One of the biggest problems in the public educational field is just that there is no engagement, or there's not as sincere of a level of engagement, and there's not as high of a level of engagement, simply because that's not what the public education system was designed to do. It wasn't designed for engagement and for collaborative learning. For the most part, it was designed for like little like worker bees. That's supposed to be the idea of right. They're getting ready for the working world and for the workforce. And I'm not saying that you don't need to know your 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Of course, that stuff is important, but I think the socialization aspect of it is very much focused nowadays, anyways, on safety and on making sure that they can find ways in which to express themselves that are healthy, right? If people could do that ahead of time, like we were talking about things being preventative as opposed to reactive. Imagine
Right.
if, and I was talking to someone else the other day about like school shootings and even just mass shootings in general. Like, imagine if the people that did those horrible things and those horrific things, imagine if they got the help that they needed. Clearly they're not okay, they're struggling with somebody. A happy individual does not go up and just start shooting people randomly. It doesn't A happy individual does not just go up and like commit some sort of heinous crime, right? Happy people and content people and people who are mentally stable don't typically do those things. So wouldn't it be great if we had people, if we had methods in place to help people deal with their own sorts of traumas and deal with their own baggage, if you want to call it that, ahead of time. So I really love what you're doing in terms of the educational standpoint. I think that's fantastic because I don't think that there's enough awareness out there just in terms of how to actually go about solving the problem. There's awareness that these things are happening and that these horrible things are taking place, but I don't think that a lot of people know where to start. So if you a sort of expert, I would say as a sort of expert on this topic, what would you say are sort of the 4 to 5 sort of takeaways or action steps that people could sort of put in place in order to promote safety and prevent things from getting out of control in the first place?
Right, right. Just to speak on the school shootings, I would say 9 out of 10, I would say even 10 out of 10, all of those shooters come from violent homes, abusive environments. So this is why it all starts in the home. As we stated in the beginning of this interview, if we make homes safe, then everything else will fall into place. Um, all of these school shooters are young. They're children themselves, a lot of them
Mhm.
17, 18, 19 years old, for crying out loud. You're you just came out of your teens, and so for you to have that much hatred and anger and rage, home is not home is hell for you.
Mhm.
It's not, and I'm not making excuses for them, don't get me wrong, but they uh that needed to be resolved when these boys or these shooters were 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. To do something when they are 17, 18, 19, it's too late. which is why at Osso Safe, we're so proud of what we're doing, because it will prevent or at least diminish the Salvador Ramoses, the Nicholas Cruzes, the Adam Lanzas from even being created, for crying out loud, because we nip it in the bud right when they're young boys versus teenagers where they could get a gun. So, but 4 or 5 takeaways. I would say, one, therapy. We are big proponents of therapy at Osso Safe. And as we have been talking about throughout this interview, there is no shame in getting help. There's shame in not getting help.
Oh, I
So
love it.
any which
I
way.
say that all the time. Yeah, I
Oh,
love
do
it.
you? Great,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So therapy in any form, whether it be one-on-one, whether it be via text, email, a group, therapy, you can't go wrong with therapy. And don't let, if let's say you go to a therapist for the first time and you don't feel right, let it be okay. Maybe you'll have to try on a few therapists on for size, for example. You got to find the right one to have it a good fit, to make it a good fit. Let that be okay. Don't give up and say, oh, this is nonsense. Maybe it'll take you 2-3 times, but once you find that therapist, it'll help you a lot. So therapy. Number 2, and this is another subject that we could talk about on its own, but pornography is a big driver of violence, huge. And I've spoken about this, especially with sex abuse, sexual violence. So we need to, and we're not talking about sexual freedom. We're all for sexual freedom at Osso Safe, but pornography is about bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. So when we give pornographic materials to our boys, whether it be our sons, our grandsons, our nephews, we are basically teaching them to be hostile to girls, to the women in their lives eventually, when they're dating. So, and even girls, it works both ways. So I would say takeaway number 2, do not give them pornographic materials and say that it is okay, that this is about sex education. It's actually the opposite. It's about sexual violence. Another takeaway, third, is do your best to not fight in front of your children. It is very traumatic. Yeah, it's very traumatic for them. I should know, I was one of them. I'm a survivor of violence. My father beat my mother on a regular basis, and my mother would beat me. So every time he would beat my mother, I felt like he was beating me. And it's very traumatic. It's just such a shock and a jolt to a child's psyche that it affects them for the rest of their lives. So I'm not saying you're not going to disagree with your significant other, that you're not going to ever fight, that you're never going to get into an argument. No, of course you are. But it should never, ever, ever cross the line of abuse, of violence, of chaos, of dysfunction. And the biggest ingredient to a healthy relationship in any capacity is respect. I would say, yeah, respect. So you can make that into the 4th takeaway, actually, in a way, is always have that in mind. Practice respect. Know what that word means. Practice it in your friendships, practice it with your children, practice it with your significant other, practice it with yourself. So all those 4 working together are ingredients for a healthy, Osso Safe household.
I think that is really something that a lot of people misunderstand, particularly if you're having a disagreement, when you're speaking to a disagreement with your partner. If you have children, and I know for me growing up, my parents certainly didn't have violent fights or anything like that. Like I never saw my father do anything of the sort to my mom. Never would he dream of it, because it just wasn't the type of man that he is. They definitely had disagreements, and us kids knew about them, in the sense of like, it was a family discussion. If there was a disagreement, then we would all sit down, and it was a much more collaborative way of approaching the issue. Obviously, like, child appropriate. My 6-year-old sister was not privy to the same conversations that I was as a 13-year-old or 14-year-old, right? But it was a much more collaborative way of approaching problems. And so my parents, I feel, modeled a very healthy way of, they weren't perfect, but they modeled a very healthy way of collaborating with each other, and of respecting each other through those sorts of circumstances. It wasn't necessarily said between them. Like, I never heard my mom or my dad say to each other, "I respect you." I mean, they may have, but I didn't hear such a thing. But they showed me that, and they showed my siblings that, through how they exemplified their relationship towards each other. And it, like I said, it wasn't that disagreements didn't happen, but it was the way that they dealt with those disagreements, and the way that they dealt with those sorts of consequences, that may have come out of those sorts of things. So I think that yeah, like, and that has carried me into a lot of my adult life, as to how to deal with disagreements. Communication is paramount. Um, and if you need a couple hours, or you need to, process your thoughts, whatever you need to do, but it's having those healthy sorts of coping mechanisms, particularly if you have children in the household that are watching you, right? They're little eyes, like you said, and they're going to mimic you. They're like parrots, only you're not raising a parrot, you're raising another human being.
Right, right. And I'm so grateful for families like yours, because you are proof. You were raised oh so safely, and you're doing it for your own family. And I applaud you and your family, your parents, because, as we say at Osso Safe, um, it, it, you can do it. It is possible. These abusive parents, they think that they live in their own world. Like, no, this is how it is, and this is how everybody, beating their child, verbally disparaging them, making promises that they have no intentions of keeping, which builds distrust in the child. I mean, that nonsense does not happen in households that practice empowerment, encouragement, freedom of choice, respect, safety. It doesn't happen. So, and you're proof. So and I love that, because that's how it should be. That needs to be the standard. That right there, what you just said, how disagreements are worked out and we work them out as a family. That's how it needs to be. That needs to be the standard, versus yelling, screaming, throwing things, hitting, punch. What are we? We're barbarians. I mean, wolves, packs of wolves. You might as well be raised by wolves. They would do it better, than your parents that are abusive. So I'm so grateful for families like yours. You're doing it. You're doing it every day, and more of that has to happen.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear. That's encouraging. Thank you so much for being here, Sabrina. It's been a pleasure. I very much have enjoyed this interview and this podcast with you, and I very much appreciate your time and your insights, and all of your expertise in this situation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kimberly. This was so great. Likewise.
That is all for this episode of The Parents Solution. If you have any comments or questions, either about this issue or others that have come up for you, you can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You are also always welcome to reach out through email, which is all over social media channels as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.